Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How we doing? How we doing? Welcome to Rush to Judgment with your girl, Jessica. Okay, so we are right back into day 8. I am going to do my best to get through the rest of day 8. But FYI, I am exhausted. I am extremely exhausted. So, if I skip through some things that I feel are irrelevant, sorry. Well, that's just how it's going to be. But that's how it's going to be because I'm tired. I'm tired. So, I'm going to turn the closed captioning on. I'm going to have to share it. I didn't share it. But we're going to make sure we have it sped up so it takes us a little less time. And then we'll do this and this and this. But then we're going to make it bigger. And voila. And press play.
We object to that schedule. We're available all day tomorrow.
What is the scheduling issue with?
I don't know if they're scheduling with Mr. Crump, which is the Zimmerman's.
We asked
Not the
that
Zimmermans.
Mr. Crump be available tomorrow because we knew that was a holiday. And we were told that neither he nor Mr. Blackwell, as I understand it, were available. And that they suggested that we begin at 6 p.m. on Sunday. That's not realistic or practical for us. While the deposition is relatively limited in scope, that doesn't necessarily mean it will be short because of potential objections. And there are indeed some new areas that may have come up as a result of Ms. Gentile's testimony.
What is it that you're asking for?
Well, the first thing I'm asking for is this. I would ask that the court recess on Friday so that we have that opportunity to take Mr. Crump's deposition. We also want to take the deposition of Steve Brenton with FDLE. We were provided with his report on June 4th, the one that's been the subject of many things, including the sanctions motion. We've had no opportunity since we started the Fry and other hearings and then jury selection, no opportunity to take his deposition and any follow-up there. So we need to do that. We need to take Mr. Crump's deposition. There are some other witnesses. If we had the opportunity, we would like to take their deposition.
Let me interrupt you for just a moment. What is the availability of Mr. Benton?
I believe he could be available almost any time, but I haven't checked with him recently. This is the first I've heard this in terms of the need to do it right away. I know that in the past they have talked about wanting to take his deposition, but
Because I know the state has said that they are planning on resting today, and this court intends to begin the defense on Friday.
What?
And that's what I had informed you yesterday. I have a jury that is sequestered. They're away from their home, from their families, and to have to take off for 4th of July, which everybody has requested and the court is obliging because it is a national holiday, to then also take off Friday and have them there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday sequestered somewhere where they not occupied is just not reasonable. Mr. Crump has been available since we began this trial on June 10th until that was the jury selection process, until he was sequestered as a potential witness from the courtroom, but he was here for every day. I don't know what Mr. Blackwell's schedule is, but it has now been almost a month since we started jury selection or even our Fry hearing. I believe he was here on June 6th in the courtroom during our Fry hearing. The court recessed early on different days. So I don't know what Mr. Blackwell's schedule was, but to have this court continue keeping a jury sequestered without having court time because you didn't coordinate that deposition within a month's period of time, I find that very hard to do.
From a scheduling standpoint, we didn't know until late in the day on June 3rd that we would be allowed to take his deposition.
Well, that's a month ago. That's 30 days
Your
ago.
Honor, we've been somewhat tied up for the last month,
Well-
beginning with June 6th, 7th, and 8th in the Fry hearing and the sanctions hearing that we haven't even finished yet. On June 9th, we met with our jury consultant and Mr. Zimmerman to prepare for jury selection, which started June 10th.
And it's my understanding that you had taken there were some depositions that were 5:30 last night. It's my understanding there's more depositions scheduled for 5:30 tonight. There's not been a request from this court to conclude court a little earlier on any day for the purposes of taking any other deposition. So I want to start, if the state
I
rests
do seem
today,
to make a
the
lot
defense
of
has Thursday, which is
excuses.
a holiday that you could utilize for whatever purposes you need to get ready. But it was always this court's intention that as soon as the state rests, that the defense begins their case. That's how it happens in every case I've ever had, and was my intention to continue to do that. And Friday would be the first business day after the holiday. So
What we're asking for is a little more time, given the way this case has proceeded. As the court's aware, we were still litigating the admissibility of evidence after the jury selection began. We certainly couldn't have taken Mr. Crump's deposition during the trial day. The court doesn't expect either Mr. O'Meara or myself to leave the courtroom, I wouldn't think, to take
you've
his
left for other reasons, but I don't want to
No,
go there. I don't want to go there. And I don't want to get into a discussion back and forth about what times may have been available, but it's never been requested for this court to recess even a half hour earlier. I know during the Fry hearings, we recessed on a Saturday because your witness wasn't available, and the court had to continually ask when your witness would be available to finish it. I had to be the one who moved that forward. Neither side moved that forward because I wanted to get that matter finished because you wanted to know an answer about it before opening statements. And I accomplished that. And if there had been a request to recess even an hour earlier, I would have done that. But now I have a jury sequestered that are going to be off on Thursday, and you don't want court on Friday, that's Saturday, Sunday. I'm not doing that.
We asked the court
Okay,
to
end of
continue the
discussion.
case so that we could take Mr. Crump's deposition, so we could finish the Fry hearing just for a few days before we started jury selection. We have been, I think, asking at every opportunity for some additional time to finish these critically important aspects of the case. Likewise, I'm simply asking for some time now. I don't know if Mr. Crump's in the building today. The court could entertain ordering him to appear tomorrow.
We are taking up now time that I want to conclude this case. The state has indicated that they would be finished with their case today. I would like to bring the jury in. You can continue to discuss this with me after the state has rested. Are we ready to bring the jury in?
Yes, Your Honor, just for point of clarification, I know we've had some delays throughout, and I just want to, I'm still pushing for the end of the day. We
I
may
am
go into
too.
Friday
That's why I
morning.
would like to get
We
started.
may go into Friday morning, but it would be Friday morning at the latest.
Let's go. I'm prepared to go as long today as we need to get the state to rest their case so we can move on with the case.
No, just so the court's
No,
aware.
please have a seat. We will discuss this after we finish for the day. I would like to bring the jury in.
Yes,
You'll
sir.
have an opportunity. Thank you very much. Let's bring the jury in.
I don't know why they send him up there to fight any of the battles. She does not like him at all. Don't send him up there no more.
That's spelled Gorgone.
What is your occupation, sir?
I'm a crime lab analyst at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in the biology or DNA section.
How long have you been working for, I'm going to refer to it as FDLE, but the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
I've been with FDLE for a little over 7 years. I started in March of 2006.
Could you briefly tell us about your education and training regarding your occupation, sir?
Yes, I received a Bachelor's of Science in Molecular and Microbiology. That was from the University of Central Florida, graduated in 2004. I was hired by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement as a forensic technologist. In that position, I screened items of evidence for the possible presence of bodily fluids that may contain DNA. I was promoted to crime lab analyst in July of 2007. I underwent a 13-month training program for that position. The first half of that training program was background readings, written and oral exams. The second part of that training was supervised casework. That would be actual casework under the supervision of a trained analyst. And that training, that 13 months culminated in a mock trial.
And have you kept up with the latest information regarding DNA, sir?
Yes, I
need to know.
test any abnormalities in the fetus during pregnancy when they do the amniocentesis. That's used in the identification of mass disaster victims, as well as the Innocence Project and paternity testing as well.
Is the DNA
What are
profiling
you
and
doing?
comparison method using STR?
Oh shit. Sorry.
accepted in the scientific community as being reliable.
Yes, it is.
And is your lab, FDLE, been accredited and been through all the hoops in terms of their accreditation?
Cool.
And I perform that testing and send the results back to that company, and then they send a notice back saying, yes, you got the correct results, or no, you did not get the correct results. I'm required to take a proficiency test every 6 months. So I take one about May and about November of every year. And I've done that every year that I've been doing independent casework. Characteristic or any kind of molecule inside your body that's doing a job, they are just repetitive, non-coding regions of DNA. And I can take advantage of the fact that those repetitive sequences vary from individual to individual. So I can use these short segments of DNA to develop a profile for.
You need a certain amount of DNA in order to even get a result. And what's the minimum you need?
Well, there's really no minimum. That step tells me about how much DNA I have in the sample.
Markers or allele or loci, and you mentioned that the test you do is either going to give you 13 or 15 possible. Is that correct?
Yes.
In terms of STR, you have 13 or 15. Did I get that right? In terms of markers?
Yes.
I don't need
You always
all
get
this.
13 or
What?
15.
No, like I said, sometimes based on the sample is try to separate out that mixture into the individual profiles that make up that.
That testing with involves.
Depending on the case scenario, when I open an item and look at it, I could be looking, and that's the one we currently use on our casework.
And has that been accepted in the scientific community as being reliable?
Yes.
Okay. And do you use the product rule in some way too in factoring?
What's the chance that a 1 is going to draw out versus a 44? It's the same concept with the DNA.
What did you do in this case? Are we going to get to that?
Sir, I'm showing you State Exhibit 186. And I ask you if you recognize State Exhibit 186, sir.
I do.
How do you recognize State Exhibit 186?
The outer package has our FDLE barcode label with case number. It also has my initials and the date that I opened this package. The internal package also has my initials and the date that I opened and took a cutting from the sample.
And what do you understand State Exhibit 186 to be, sir?
This is a blood stain card from Trayvon Martin.
Let me show you State Exhibit 188, and I ask you if you recognize that, sir.
I do. The outer package has our FDLE barcode label, my initials, the date I opened the package. The internal packages with the swabs also have my initials and the date.
And what is that, sir?
This would be buccal swabs taken from George Zimmerman. That would be swabs taken from the inside of the mouth.
If I just show that to the jury, Your Honor. So all this writing that's on here in terms of your initials would be on here, right here, right? I got it right. Where would your initials be on here?
Oh, right here.
Okay. And that would be true of all the exhibits, in other words, that you can verify that you actually did analysis on this.
Yes.
Okay. And it would have your FDLE number, and I think you said the yellow print card or whatever you call this label is also FDLE?
Yes, the yellow barcode label is from FDLE.
Now, those are what I think you referred to as standards, correct? Known standard from George Zimmerman and also from Trayvon Martin, is that correct?
Yes, those are known standards that were used for comparison to all the unknown samples in the case.
You do the process, you go through the extraction, quantification, et cetera, you get some results, I'm assuming, right?
Hopefully.
Okay. Did you get some in this case on both of those?
Yes.
Okay. Do you then prepare, and for the record, I'm going to show you State Exhibit 206, which has been shown to counsel, no objection. Well, I'll show it to you. Okay. I'm going to show you these. I'm going to clear up the objections that matter. First, let me actually show you the actual exhibit so you have it there. And I want you to talk about this, explaining, I believe there's 13 loci of markers on this one. So let me show you State's Exhibit 206. Thank you, Your Honor. Tell us just, when you talked about all these markers, let's go, and you don't have your highlight. I need Mr. Guy's assistance. Listen. Right here. I'm going to give, may I push the witness again, Your Honor? I'm going to give you this fancy pen, I guess, or whatever you call this. And I think the button's right. You see it? Okay. Let's talk about, you got 3 columns here. And actually, I think I can do it here in red too. So you do green, I'll do red. But let's talk about this description right here. What are all these? I know they're referred to as loci. What does this mean right here?
This column right here they are the names of the 13 locations that I tested for these samples. Their loci it's like a fancy scientific way of saying location. So I test 13 loci. Loci would be plural and locus would be one single location. So these are their names, and they basically represent, about where these locations are located on the DNA molecule.
Who came up with D3S1358? Who came up with that fancy name for that?
I have no idea. They're basically representing where, on what chromosome. This would be on the chromosome 3, chromosome 8, and they represent about where on the DNA molecule that they are located, these locations that I test.
All right, and tell me the significance of this one right here. And I'm circling.
Yes, the amylogenin location is in addition to the 13 location. It's a sex-determining location, and it gives me an indication of whether or not that individual has 2 X chromosomes, which would make them a female, or an X and a Y chromosome, which would make them a male.
Okay, if you could move to that middle column that's titled JR-2, Zimmerman JR2 is the number I'm assuming that was designated by FDA or by the submitting agency.
Yes, that's
Sure.
the exhibit number, exhibit JR2, and that was from Sanford Police
What do
Department.
they identify as?
Under that column right there, you have, it appears on each column, 2 numbers. Tell me the significance of that if you could.
These numbers here, if you read down, this is the DNA profile for George Zimmerman. These numbers represent different size fragments of DNA that are found at that location. So that's my result at that location. These numbers are called alleles. And what these alleles represent are a different size fragment based on how many repeat units they have on those highly repetitive.
Again, what is the point of
segments of
this?
DNA.
I don't understand.
4 separate swabs from different parts of the gun that's already been identified. But do you do an examination as to each one individually?
Yes, I open one exhibit at a time. So even though those 4 were found in the same envelope, they're all packaged separately and they came from different parts of the gun. So I would open one at a time and analyze one at a time.
1A from pistol grip, is that correct?
Yes, this would be.
The swab or the DNA that you developed from the pistol grip of the defendant's gun, it was positive for blood, correct?
Yes,
And then there was a mixture. The major was matched the defendant, George Zimmerman,
yes,
and you were able to exclude Trayvon Martin as having DNA on the pistol grip. Is that correct?
yes. Trayvon Martin was excluded as being a possible contributor to this mixture on the grip.
I want to move next to the
What does that mean? Sorry.
second part of the swab from the pistol trigger this time on the previous exhibit that you examined. Did you again perform or try to do the same testing, or tell us what that significance of that FDLE exhibit 3 was, sir?
The 21B was a swab collected from the trigger of the pistol. I did not perform the chemical test for blood on that exhibit. The swab itself didn't give me an indication that blood might be present. There was very little staining on that swab, so I did not perform that test. I did not get a mixture of DNA, and the results that I got were so limited from that sample that I was not able to interpret those results. So when I get, when I get less than a complete DNA profile, like I said earlier, I could potentially get a partial DNA profile, but I could also get significantly less results than that. And if it doesn't meet a certain threshold, then I can't make any comparisons or interpretations with any of that data. It was too little data for me to make an interpretation.
The other swab, I believe, was from the
So
pistol
he had
slide.
diddly
Tell us
shit.
what your findings were regarding that, sir.
The swab from the pistol slide gave a negative result when I tested it for the possible presence of blood. The DNA testing result was not a mixture. It also gave me limited results. However, I was able to make determinations on this. It was too limited for me to match it to any one individual. However, I was able to make a comparison and potentially exclude any individual that I thought couldn't possibly have contributed to the sample. And as far as the comparison to the George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, I was not able to include or exclude either of those individuals to that limited sample.
This just wasn't enough there?
I just wasn't able to make a determination. There wasn't enough information for them present to make an inclusion, because I wasn't able to make an inclusion to the sample in general. And there wasn't enough of an absence of their information for me to say there's no way that they could have contributed to it.
I believe
So
the
you
fourth
can't tell
swab was taken
if
from
they touched it or they
the
didn't
holster
touch it.
itself. Tell us, and that's the last part of this slide that I've shown you. Tell us, if you could, what your findings were regarding that.
The swab from the holster tested negative for the possible presence of blood. The DNA testing gave me a mixture of DNA. I was able to resolve out a major DNA profile for the sample, and that major DNA profile matched George Zimmerman. And the statistical analysis is right here. It's the same 1 in 11 quadrillion Caucasians, 1 in 1.5 quintillion African Americans, and 1 in 57 quadrillion Southeastern Hispanics. That would be for the probability of the major DNA profile. As far as the minor or lesser contributors, I was not able to determine a DNA profile for any of those minor contributors. And when I made the comparison to Trayvon Martin, I was not able to include or exclude him from the mixture.
So as to the holster where you got a major, it matches George Zimmerman, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you then also examine
Exclude
fingernail
Trayvon
scrapings from Trayvon Martin taken to the medical examiner's office?
I did.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm going to show you what's in, thank you, Your Honor. State's exhibit number 191, and I ask you if you recognize State's exhibit 191, sir.
I do. The outside packaging has my Florida Department Law Enforcement case number, barcode label, my initials, and the date. The two internal packages also have my initials and the date.
And these are not, at least when I look at them, they don't appear to be Q-tips in terms of a little swab at the end. Is that
No.
correct?
It's-
What are these?
It's a wooden scraper stick. It has one pointy edge, and that edge is used to scrape down in between the fingernail and the skin to try to obtain any kind of foreign DNA that might be present under someone's fingernails that might have happened during an encounter or struggle.
Okay. And so it's the State's exhibit I'll get the right number here, 181, I believe. I'm sorry, yes, 191, excuse me. This would have, you can identify it as coming from the fingernail scrapes from medical examiner's office, Trayvon Benjamin Martin, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, Your Honor, may I publish this to the jury?
Yes, you may.
And even though you don't have a swab, how do you remove, if there is any DNA from this? What do you do?
I take a swab and I swab the pointy end to try to obtain anything that is on that pointy end that came from under the fingernails.
And if we could talk about your findings as to that specific exhibit, sir. I gather there's a right hand and a left hand, is that correct?
Yes, there were two envelopes inside the main envelope. One contained the right hand, which I labeled A, and the left hand was labeled B.
Okay. And if I could, I've put it up on the screen here. Tell us what your findings regarding your DNA analysis of the right hand fingernail scrapings of Mr. Martin.
The right hand, the stick from the right hand had some red-brown staining on it, so I performed the chemical test for the possible presence of blood, and it tested positive. The DNA profile I obtained was a single source profile, and it matched the DNA profile from Trayvon Martin. In a sample like this, I call this an intimate sample because it's collected directly from an individual's body. So when you collect a sample from an individual's body, their DNA profile is expected to be seen on that swab or on that sample. So what I'm looking for on an intimate sample is anything foreign to that person. And in this case, because the DNA profile matched Trayvon Martin, that means there were no DNA foreign to him on that sample.
In other words, from the right fingernail scrapings of Trayvon Martin, you did not find any of George Zimmerman's DNA there. Is that correct?
No, there was nothing foreign to Trayvon Martin.
If we could move to the second part, which I believe would be the fingernail scrapings from the left hand. If you could tell us your findings as to that, sir.
Yes, the left hand stick was not tested for the possible presence of blood. It did not have any staining on it whatsoever. I swabbed that, performed the testing, and I did not get any DNA results from that swab.
I believe you also examined some swabs, possible DNA swabs from the Skittles bag and also from flashlight. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. If I may approach the witness again, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Sir, I'm showing you State Exhibit 169, and I ask you if you recognize State Exhibit 169, sir.
I do. The outside, as well as the inside, contain my initials and the date. The outside also contains my barcode, FDLE barcode label.
And are these two exhibits the swab from the Skittles and also from the flashlight? Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, and are they labeled as such? Does one say a bag of Skittles and the other one say flashlight on it?
Yes. Each box was labeled, and then I took and labeled them A and B.
Your Honor, may I publish that to the jury?
Yes, you may.
In other words, the box itself has labels as to where they came from. One says Skittles and the other one says flashlight. That's right.
Yes.
We could. I want to ask you about your results or findings regarding those two exhibits, sir. Specifically, let's talk about the, thank you, Your Honor. Let's talk about the swab from the Skittles bag. What were your findings regarding that, sir?
The swab from the Skittles bag gave a positive result for the possible presence of blood. It was a single source DNA profile. It was a partial DNA profile, meaning I got less than the areas. These two samples, I tested 15 areas. It's 15 loci as opposed to the 13 on the rest of the samples in this case. So I got results at less than the 15 locations. However, that partial DNA profile did match Trayvon Martin, and the probability of finding that DNA profile at random would be 1 in 100 quadrillion Caucasians, 1 in 160 trillion African Americans, and 1 in 18 quadrillion Hispanics.
I want to move now to the swab from the flashlight recovered at the scene. If you could, what were your findings regarding that exhibit?
The swab from the flashlight gave a negative result for blood, and I was not able to obtain any DNA results from that swab.
Sir, I now want to move to some analysis you did of a sweatshirt or hooded sweatshirt. Do you recall doing analysis? And I'm showing you for the record, Station Exhibit 118, a photograph. Do you recall doing analysis on that exhibit, sir?
Yes, I do.
Okay. With the court's permission, may we turn on the lights we're going to show the actual exhibit. So thank you, Your Honor. And just to know that, the court permission step down, Your Honor. So we're going, if I could, let's try this. Stand over here, just keep your voice a little loud, so let's back up a little bit. Make sure the court reporter can, you got that. Obviously, we've got the photograph up there, but what number is that, Mr. Guy? Is it on the back? 155. 155, do you recognize this, sir?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize it?
It has my tag, which is located right down here with the date I examined it, as well as my initials, case number, exhibit.
Okay. Now, there appear to be some circles right here and some numbers or letters or something. How did they get there?
Those are the stains that I saw during my visual examination of the item for possible blood. I performed the chemical test for blood on those items, on those stains, and I labeled them A, B, and C.
And we're going to get the photographs, and then we'll also, let me turn this around. You'll show on the backside, did you examine the whole thing itself?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this cutting, did you have anything to do with this cutting right here?
No, that was intact when I examined the item.
Okay. And there appears to be on the backside of this some writing here and some, I would refer to them as holes, but can you explain that, sir?
That would be my stain C that I examined, and those are the cuttings that I took to perform the DNA testing. So for this one, for example, I took 3 small cuttings, put them in one tube, and tested that sample.
So in other words, as opposed to the prior exhibits where you got a swab, you're actually looking at the exhibit yourself and making cuttings?
Correct.
Okay. There also appears to be on this exhibit, I can't testify, so tell me what this means right over here.
That would be stain B. Stain A was on the front bottom. Stain B is right here, and then this is stain C. Those are the 3 stains that I examined.
So from the hooded jacket or sweatshirt recovered from Trayvon Martin, you found 3 separate stains, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and you've labeled them as B, C, and then I think on the front is A, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And does this accurately show the area where you made a cutting in order to determine whether that was DNA or not on there?
Yes.
Okay. And how can you say that actually occurred? Did you take photographs of it too? Did you document it somewhere other than obviously looking at it and you can see there's letters there?
It's all documented in my notes. I do have a photograph, which is on the screen up there, the photograph I took, but it's all documented in my notes, what I did and when I did it.
Your Honor, may he return back to the seat? Thank you. So we're going, let's talk about the findings regarding the hooded jacket recovered from, or that Mr. Trayvon Martin was wearing. And I'm showing you State Exhibit 119. Does that, can you show us where there's a stain there or appears to be a stain there?
That would be stain C, which was on the back of the sweatshirt.
Am I circling it right here?
Yes.
Okay. So in addition to actually making your cuttings, you're photographing what you do so that if you had to come and explain it to somebody or testify about it, you would be able to say, this is exactly where I got this cutting and this is where I got this result.
Correct. This is a photograph of before I did any testing. Obviously, there's no cutting taken there yet, but in my notes, I describe chemical test for blood, the result, cutting taken, cutting not taken, and so on.
State's exhibit, I'm going back to 203, I believe it is. I want to ask you about the results. Let's talk about stain A that you've shown the jury already. Tell us what your findings were regarding that, sir.
Stain A gave me a positive result for blood, for the possible presence of blood. I obtained a single source profile, so no mixture. It was a partial DNA profile at less than the 13 locations that I test, and it matched the DNA profile from Trayvon Martin.
And I believe you stated, stain A from the hooded jacket from Trayvon Martin was in the front. Is that correct?
It was in the front lower part of the jacket.
Okay. Let's talk about the stain B, which I believe you stated it was one of the sleeves. Is that correct?
Yes, stain B was on the sleeve, the left sleeve.
And if you could tell us what your findings were regarding that, sir.
Stain B tested negative for the possible presence of blood, and I performed no further testing on that stain.
And the stain C, which I believe was in the back of that hooded jacket, what were your findings regarding that, sir?
Stain C gave me a positive result for the possible presence of blood. However, I was not able to obtain any DNA results from my testing.
I believe we have one more. Tell us if you can what your findings were regarding that specific exhibit.
In addition to the 3 stains that I tested, I was also asked to swab to see if there was any foreign DNA on the cuffs or the lower part of the sleeves of the sweatshirt. So I collected, first I did the test for blood on a rubbing from the entire cuff and lower part of the sleeve. I considered the lower sleeve from about the elbow down to the cuff. So I tested that whole area for the possible presence of blood, which tested negative for the right cuff and sleeve. I swabbed that area to see if there was any DNA foreign to Trayvon Martin, since it was his sweatshirt, so I can expect to potentially see
Secrets of the
his DNA profile there. And it was not, there was no DNA foreign to Trayvon Martin on that right sleeve.
And did you also do that to the left cuff or lower sleeve?
Correct. That was about the same results. It was negative for the possible presence of blood, and I was not able to obtain any DNA foreign to Trayvon Martin from the left sleeve cuff swab that I collected.
I want to make sure the jury understood that. Are you saying that as to the hooded jacket from Mr. Martin, right cuff and left cuff? Let me, Mr. Guy, would you help me with this? I want to make sure we're talking the same thing. Make sure the jury understands.
You're not understanding anything.
When we personally.
I don't understand. There was no foreign blood found on his hoodie.
For the record, I'm showing you state exhibit. Mr. Guy.
Said that already.
155. Okay. So go. When you're talking about the sleeve, how much of the sleeve are you rubbing? If you could just, when the coach mentioned he's standing
Rubbing.
tell us how much of the sleeve you're actually trying to get DNA from.
I swabbed the cuff and lower sleeve area, and I considered that from the elbow or midpoint of the sleeve forward. So I did the chemical test for blood from about here forward in the cuff, which tested negative, and I was not able to obtain any foreign
And
DNA.
did you do that also from his left sleeve?
Yes,
Okay. And when you're doing that, are you doing both sides or one side, or what part of the sleeve are you doing?
all the way around. So the front and back of the outside surface.
And then you said you're also tell us about this, what you're doing here in the cuffs.
The same thing. It was all collected with one swab, the cuff area to here.
Okay. And there was nothing foreign to Trayvon Martin. In other words, you didn't find another person's DNA on those, either one of those.
Correct.
Thank you, ma'am. Take it back. Thank you, Your Honor. Did you do then examination?
No
or
further
analysis on the
questions.
sweatshirt that Mr. Martin was wearing underneath that hooded sweat jacket?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and do you see before you photograph of State's Exhibit 120, sir?
Yes,
And did you perform or attempt to perform analysis on that exhibit, sir?
I did.
Okay. I'm showing you State's Exhibit 121, which I believe covers the bottom part of that sweatshirt. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the bottom front surface.
Okay. And there appear to be, I'm circling as best I can, some letters with some circles. How did those get there?
I put those
No,
circles
did that.
there when I was visually examining the item for any
Duh.
red-brown stains that could possibly be blood. other than the large red brown stain around the hole in the upper left-hand side. Those are any stains other than that. I circled to perform the chemical test and then possibly do DNA testing on those stains.
Mr. Gargell, let me go back to State Exhibit 120. When you say you did not do anything around this area that I'm circling right here where it appears there's a hole, is that correct?
Yes.
And why was that, sir?
I was requested to not touch that area. We needed to preserve that area for
Which one am I
future
on?
testing in another discipline, in another department in my lab, the firearms section. So any disturbance that I cause in that area with my cuttings and rubbings and stuff could affect their future testing, as well as the fact that, around the potential bullet hole there, we're pretty sure we know whose blood that is, and it's not as important as maybe the peripheral stains on the sweatshirt.
Let me then go back to 121. Now, why is it that you put a letter as to each one? Why do you put A, B, and it appears D right here, and then C? Why do you do that?
Just to have a unique identity to that stain, so I can refer back. Stain A was positive, stain B was positive, or so on, as opposed to just circling them and getting confused as to which stain. This way, I know what stain A is, I know where stain A is, and I know where stain A is located, and I know what I did to stain A and what the results are.
Okay. Let me show you, and let's talk now about your findings. And I apologize, Your Honor. Can we turn the lights back on? I'm going to show them the actual exhibit. We're going to try it up there. Can we approach the window, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
State Exhibit 156.
Okay. Where am I on that one? Oh my God, that one. Oh,
Now, if I can get you to look at this exhibit.
our
You recognize
shoulder.
this exhibit?
Yes, I do. That has the white tag up towards the collar area, has my initials, as well as the date, the exhibit number, and the FDLE case number.
And can you point to the area that the jury just saw from the photographs in terms of A, B, and C? Yeah, I apologize, Your Honor. May he stand up?
Here, stain A is located in the lower right-hand portion. Right, yeah, right hand. Here's stain B.
I'm sorry, my fault. I'll tell you what, let me get Mr. Guy to assist us. With the court's permission, he just stepped down. We'll do it easier for you. I don't want you. Mr. Gargell, let's go ahead and step down and let's use that table. I apologize, my fault.
What do you do? Fall?
I may do it easier for you. I don't want you. Mr. Gargell, let's go ahead and step down.
Right hand. Here's stain B.
I'm sorry, my fault. I'll tell you what, let me get Mr. Guy to assist us. With the court's permission, he just stepped down. We'll do it easier for you.
No, I still don't know what he did.
Right hand. Here's stain B.
I'm sorry, my
Yep.
fault.
He
I'll
fell.
tell you what, let me get Mr. Guy to assist us. With the court's permission, he just stepped down. We'll do it easier for you. I don't want you. Mr. Gargell, let's go ahead and step down and let's use that table.
Jesus.
I apologize, my fault.
Yeah, Charlie Brown. Your fault.
Go ahead.
Stain C is located here. Stain D is a large stain in the middle here. And stain E is kind of on the side of the left-hand side.
Let's turn it around, make sure whether there's anything back here or not.
I mean, but Jesus, why do you have to have such a big ass exhibit?
There were
Like,
stains located on the back that I performed testing on.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Anything you keep going?
bit freaking ridiculous, wouldn't you say? Oh, he feels silly. He fell down in front of all of those people.
All right, let's talk about your findings, sir. The gray sweatshirt from Trayvon Martin, stain A. Your Honor, we have assistance with the lights. I apologize. Tell us, if you could, what your findings were regarding stain A.
Stain A, which was located on the lower left-hand side, it tested positive for the possible presence of blood. I was able to obtain a single source complete DNA profile, which matched George Zimmerman. And the frequency occurrence of that DNA profile was 1 in 11 quadrillion Caucasians, 1 in 1.5 quintillion African
I don't know what
Americans,
that means.
and 1 in 57 quadrillion Southeastern Hispanics.
So are you saying that in the shirt, gray sweatshirt, assuming Mr. Martin was wearing this, that was underneath the hooded jacket, that you found the defendant's DNA on there? Is that correct? On stain A?
Yes, the complete profile matched the profile of George Zimmerman.
Okay, let me backtrack a second. And stain A would be, I believe you said right here, is that correct? I'm showing you
Yes.
for the record, State's Exhibit 121.
Oh,
Is
That
correct?
would be stain A,
it's right
yes.
there.
Let's talk about stain B from the gray sweatshirt of Trayvon Martin, sir.
Stain B also gave me a positive result for the possible presence of blood. I was able to obtain a single source complete DNA profile from stain B. It matched the profile of Trayvon Martin, and the frequency of occurrence for that complete DNA profile would be 1 in
Did he
3.9
say it was
quintillion
DNA or
Caucasians,
blood?
1 in 3 quadrillion African Americans, and 1 in 290 quadrillion Southeastern Hispanics.
So if we could talk about stain C from the gray sweatshirt, sir.
Stain C tested negative for the possible presence of blood. I did no further testing on that
All
stain.
right. I believe you also had a stain D, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, tell us what your findings were regarding that.
Stain D tested positive for blood, for possible presence of blood. I was able to obtain a mixture of DNA from that exhibit. The mixture was not resolvable, meaning I was not able to determine which DNA profile in that mixture was a major contributor or a minor contributor. So in that instance, as I explained earlier, I take that entire mixture, all those numbers at those locations, and compare the known standards to see, are those individual DNA profiles represented amongst those alleles, those numbers. And I was able to determine that both George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin were included as potential contributors to that mixture. And then the relevance of that is it's called a combined probability of inclusion, meaning if I pulled a random person off the street, tested their profile, what would be the probability that they would also be included as a potential contributor to that mixture? So the combined probability of inclusion for this mixture from stain D was 1 in 4 million Caucasians, 1 in 2.1 million African Americans, and 1 in 6.4 million Southeastern Hispanics.
And as to that mixture there, you've notated there, it's been notated defendant and Trayvon Martin included as possible contributors, is that correct?
Yes, they're included, both of them.
I want to talk about stain E from that gray sweatshirt and what were your findings regarding that, sir?
Stain E tested positive for blood. I was able to obtain a complete single source profile from that, which matched Trayvon Martin. And then
Go ahead, I'm sorry. You've already covered in terms of probability
Yeah.
statistically. Stain E, where would that have come from? And stain D, where would those have come from, sir?
Stain D was the large stain that was in the middle of the front surface. Stain E was the smaller stain that was on the right-hand side, kind of like on the side of the sweatshirt, towards the bottom.
Let's talk about what's been described as the gray sweatshirt from Trayvon Martin, right cuff, lower sleeve. Tell us what your findings were regarding that, sir.
In the same fashion as the dark gray hooded sweatshirt, I did do the chemical test for blood on the lower half of the sleeve and cuff area for this sweatshirt. And the right sleeve and cuff tested negative for the possible presence of blood. And the DNA profile showed nothing foreign to Trayvon Martin.
If I could, did you do the same thing for the left cuff and left lower sleeve?
Yes.
And what were your findings regarding that, sir?
The left cuff and sleeve also tested negative for blood. And the DNA profile I obtained was a mixture. So when I have a sample where I can expect an individual's DNA profile because it was his sweatshirt, I can make that assumption and look at what was foreign to that individual. So there was foreign DNA to Trayvon Martin on that sleeve. However, it was too limited for me to be able to match it to any individual. I was able to potentially exclude if I felt a person could be excluded from that mixture as a foreign contributor. However, with my comparison, George Zimmerman's profile to that foreign DNA, I was not able to exclude him.
I want to then go to State's Exhibit 109, a photograph. I believe this is jacket that Mr. Zimmerman was wearing. There's some letters and circles. Tell us, if you could, what this photograph shows. And we'll actually show you the actual exhibit, but just briefly tell us photographs.
This is a picture I took of the jacket represented as being worn by George Zimmerman. And I did the same visual examination on this jacket for potential red-brown stains that could occur. And those were all circled. I was able to visually see 17
They don't
different
have
stains,
his,
red-brown stains that I wanted to test for possible blood. Those were labeled A through Q on this jacket. Here you can see Q and N and R. They're all throughout the jacket and the sleeves. I used an alternate light source because the color of the jacket and the red-brown stains kind of blended in together. So I used an alternate light source, which is different light bulbs of different wavelength that bring out the fluorescent property of certain bodily fluids. Semen fluoresces, saliva has a little bit of fluorescent property. Blood does not fluoresce. However, the different wavelengths of different light help you see the contrast sometimes between the potential blood stains and the color of the jacket. So using that alternate light source, I located 14 additional stains for a total of 31 stains. Those additional 14 were labeled stain R through stain EE.
Then you move to state exhibit 110. Is that the backside of that jacket, sir? Photograph
Yes.
of it.
Yes.
And states exhibit 111. What does that photograph show, sir?
That's the same jacket that was to stain A is located up kind of on the inside of the collar of the jacket. So I wanted to get a good picture of that so I can remember where that stain was located. It wasn't visible in the other pictures.
And am I circling another stain that you located?
Yes, that would be the last stain, which would be stain EE.
And states exhibit 112. What does that photograph show, sir?
That's the same jacket. That would be the backside of the right hand sleeve.
And how about states exhibit 113? What does that photograph show, sir?
That would be the front side of the right hand sleeve.
And states exhibit 114. What does that photograph show?
That would be the backside of the left sleeve.
And states exhibit 115, sir.
That would be the front side of the left sleeve.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, may we show the witness and exhibit? And this time I'll ask Mr. Gordo to step down.
Yes, if you'll please step in.
Gotta be George's jacket, all done up like that. Oh, looky there, it is. Freaking weirdos.
Gordo, if you can just kind of show the jury what this exhibit shows, and I'm assuming you identify it by your markings.
Yes, this tag here contains my case number. There are my initials, the exhibit number, and the date that I performed this examination.
And for instance, right here on his right sleeve, there's some writing here in a circle and then some cutting. Do you use the same technique that you talked about earlier?
Yes, I visually examined and used the alternative light source to go through and circle any stains of interest. And then I performed the chemical test for possible presence of blood. Anything that was positive, I took on for DNA testing. Anything was negative, I'd stop right there.
Now, when you're making all these cuttings from this exhibit, the jacket, do you kind of just put them all in a little bag or a little tube and then just kind of mix it together? Or do you keep each cutting that you make, each specific stain that you've labeled, you keep each one separately, or do you kind of just throw them all together?
No, every individual stain that I'm going to perform DNA testing on that gave a positive result, I cut a portion of that out and put it in its own individual tube. And that's the tube that I actually go on and perform the extraction and the quantification and so on.
So you do, as to each particular stain, you do a separate analysis, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me just show you.
No, he
the
just
backside of it.
swabs them all and just kind of throws them in there.
What is this part of state exhibit 151 show, sir?
It's the backside of the same jacket with more stains that I.
Defendant's jacket.
Stain A gave a positive result for blood. I was able to obtain a complete single source profile, which matched George Zimmerman.
Let's talk about stain B from that jacket, sir.
Stain B gave the same
Oh, he's
result,
got his
positive
own
for
blood.
blood. Matched complete single source profile matching George Zimmerman.
And I gather in your analysis here, if you would have found evidence of Trayvon Martin on there, you would have documented, is that correct?
Correct.
No.
In other words,
If I determine that a profile I obtained from a stain is from a single source, meaning there's no indication of a second person's DNA in that sample, then I compare it to the standard. If that matches, then that's a single source profile matching a known sample, and there's no foreign DNA. If I see some foreign DNA to that single source profile, then that's when I would indicate that I have a mixture of DNA.
now, in terms of the stains you're looking at, are you looking just for blood, or are you just looking for, in other words, does blood, can there be other stuff other than blood there that would be DNA foreign to somebody?
Yes, well, these stains tested positive for blood, and I took those cuttings that we were looking at, put them in a tube, and tested it. As far as what my results are from, I mean, if I have a blood stain, it's a pretty safe assumption that that DNA, or at least some of that DNA in that sample, came from that blood stain. But there's no way for me to tell, if I get a mixture of DNA, there's no way for me to tell, okay, this major came from the blood, and this minor came from skin cells from someone touching the jacket or from saliva that's on the jacket. My DNA results, I can't tell exactly where those came from as far as the blood, semen, saliva, whatever bodily fluid I'm looking for on that item.
But so far as the stains A and B, they're both matching the defendant. And in other words, Trayvon Martin is not on either one of those stains. Is that correct?
Yes, the profile on those two match the defendant.
Stains exhibit, stain C from defendant's jacket, sir.
Stain C gave the same results, positive for blood, a complete single source profile matching George Zimmerman.
Stains exhibit, stain D from defendant's jacket.
He's
Where
just
we find it
bleeding
right
all
now, sir.
over himself.
Stain D tested negative for blood. So that was as far as I went with that one.
Okay, stain E from defendant's jacket. What were your findings regarding that?
Stain E gave a positive result for blood. So I brought that onto DNA testing. It gave me a mixture of DNA.
Oh,
I was able to resolve out a complete DNA profile for the major contributor to the mixture, and that matched George Zimmerman. The minor, I was not able to determine any DNA profiles for the lesser contributors or minor contributors, and I was not able to make any determination as far as if Trayvon Martin was included or excluded to that mixture.
And is that because you didn't have enough there to be able to say it is Trayvon Martin or it isn't?
I was able to make inclusions or exclusions to that mixture. However, when I made the comparison, it was in that in-between stage that I talked about, where I didn't have enough of his information to say he's definitely included in this mixture, and I didn't have enough absence to say I believe for sure that he could not have contributed to the mixture.
Do you recall stain E where it was on defendant's jacket, sir?
I would have to look at the
on the
picture.
back.
Okay, we can go back to the exhibit, but go ahead if you need to look at the picture.
Double E was on the back.
Stain E was located on the back right shoulder of
Oh.
the jacket. So right about here, the back
That's
of the
right.
right
See?
shoulder.
I'm gonna have to sleep. and I
Back
was
right
paying
shoulder of the
attention.
jacket, is that correct?
Yes.
Let's move on to stain F from the defendant's jacket.
Stain F tested negative for blood, so no DNA testing was performed.
Stain G.
Stain G gave me a positive result for the possible presence of blood. The DNA testing of that item gave me limited results, so limited that I was not able to make any kind of interpretations on that result.
Stain H from defendant's jacket, sir.
Stain H tested negative for blood.
Stain I.
Stain I gave me a positive result for blood. The DNA testing showed a mixture of DNA. I was able to resolve out a partial DNA profile for the major contributor to that mixture, which matched George Zimmerman. And the statistical analysis over here is on that partial profile for that major contributor. The minor, I could not determine a DNA profile for any of the lesser contributors to the mixture. However, in my comparison, Trayvon Martin was excluded as a possible contributor to that mixture.
So in other words, there's no way that was Trayvon Martin. You excluded him completely.
Yes, that was my determination.
Stain J, from the defendant's jacket.
Stain J gave a positive result for blood. The DNA testing gave me a complete single source profile, which matched George Zimmerman.
Okay. Defendant's jacket, stain K, sir.
Stain K gave a positive result for blood. I obtained a complete single source profile matching George Zimmerman.
Stain L from defendant's jacket, sir.
Stain L also gave a positive result for blood. The testing was the same, complete single source profile matching George Zimmerman.
Stain M from that jacket, sir.
That would be the same result, positive for blood, single source complete profile matching George Zimmerman.
States N.
Stain N gave a positive result for blood. I obtained a mixture of DNA. The major contributor and the DNA profile for the minor contributor in the sample were both resolved.
And
Meaning-
what were your findings?
The major contributor matched George Zimmerman, and the minor, which was a partial profile for that minor contributor, that matched Trayvon Martin.
And when you say a partial profile, what do you mean?
Meaning I was able to determine the minor, lesser contributor's profile at less than the 13 locations.
And do you recall where stain N was on defendant's jacket, sir?
Stain N is on the front right upper part of the jacket. So the front of the right hand shoulder.
Stain O, sir. What were your findings regarding that?
Stain O tested positive for blood. I got a complete single source profile matching George Zimmerman.
Continuing defendant's jacket, stain P, sir. What were your findings regarding that?
Stain P gave a positive result for blood, a complete single source profile matching George Zimmerman.
Stain Q.
excuse me, stain Q was negative for blood.
Stain R,
Stain R was also negative for blood.
stain S,
Stain S also negative for possible presence of blood.
stain T.
Stain T was also negative.
Continuing defendant's jacket, stain U, sir.
Not limited results. However, I was not able to make a determination on either George Zimmerman or Trayvon Martin, so I was not able to exclude either of them.
Some kind of holes or circles or something. Is that the same kind of analysis you did in terms of cuttings?
Yes, I performed a visual analysis of this item and I was able to obtain or to visualize all red-brown stains that I was interested in potentially testing. They were labeled A through P on this one. There were 16 total stains.
Stage exhibit 117, is that the backside of that same exhibit, sir, or item?
Yes.
Photograph of it?
Oh my God.
With the course permission, may we show the witness and make Mr. Gorgon step down again?
Bag with my
Wow.
initials, the date, the case number, the date I source, complete profile matching George Zimmerman.
We're through for the light, Your Honor. Thank
George, I feel you on board too. Fuck.
The chart, thank you. The chart is exhibit number 203. Is that what yours says?
To the laboratory and brought to me in a sealed envelope or a sealed paper bag, and I take it from there. Sometimes,
For example,
yes, moisture, heat, humidity, all those environmental.
or Mr. Martin,
Yes, 21C from the slide. That's correct.
which means that there was some DNA that you could identify through analysis.
Correct. There was some information present for my testing of that item. It was not enough information for me to be able to match it to any one individual. I can't tell if it's a mixture or single source because a lot of that information that I need is missing. But there was enough information for that specific sample for me to make comparisons and make an exclusion potentially. And I wasn't able to exclude either of the two individuals.
So what that means, bottom line, is that in some situations you have limited DNA, but you have enough to say it could not have come from someone.
Correct.
Whereas in this case, you had a limited amount, but indeed the DNA could have come from either George Zimmerman or Trayvon Martin.
I wasn't able to exclude them. So I can't say that there's no way that they could have contributed to that very limited sample.
Of course, the slide of the gun is also a hard surface that would be subject to not only the same environmental effects that we talked about, but perhaps handling, the way the evidence was packaged or secured even.
Correct.
Similarly, with regard to the holster, you did indicate that you were able to identify a profile that matched Mr. Zimmerman.
Correct. There was
I'm sorry, so you're confident then that Mr. Zimmerman's DNA is on the holster?
the major DNA profile from the holster matched George Zimmerman.
And you wouldn't know from what part of the holster, for example?
No, I don't know where on the holster they swabbed. It was represented as coming from the holster. So I don't know if that means the entire holster, the inside, outside, or what.
Just somewhere on that greater surface,
Just
there must have been some
somewhere
of George Zimmerman's DNA somewhere.
over
Yes, the profile, the major
rainbow.
profile matched George Zimmerman.
And then insofar as the holster from Trayvon Martin, you had limited information on a minor contributor,
Yes,
and you were not able to exclude or specifically include Trayvon Martin as a contributor to that DNA.
that's
So it
correct.
could be, or it couldn't be.
When you say exclude, you mean could not possibly have been in your world. In the scientific world, DNA statistics, when you exclude somebody, you're saying with those kinds
It
of numbers,
cannot
it
be
really
them.
couldn't have been that person.
No, I'm saying there's enough of an absence of their information that they could not have been part of that data. The data that I'm seeing, that mixture of DNA, if I exclude someone, I'm saying they could not, I don't think they contributed to that data. Does that mean they never touched or came in contact or seen that item? I don't know. I know from what I tested on that swab and my results, if I exclude someone, I'm saying I don't think that they are possibly part of that data that I obtained from that swab.
And when you say you've excluded them, it's based upon that probability statistical model that you talked about.
Not necessarily.
No?
I'm saying I don't feel that their information is not represented enough that I feel there's no way that they could have contributed to that data. I performed the statistics for the inclusions and matches to show relevance for a match or an inclusion, but an exclusion is just, I don't feel that person could have contributed, and that's the end of it.
Not enough data. Well,
Feel like
of the
that
data
way.
that you have, it simply doesn't match in any meaningful way the person that you've excluded.
Exactly. The data present does not not enough of that person's profile is present in that unknown sample for me to say they could have possibly contributed to it.
Does the ability to conduct reliable, meaningful DNA analysis sometimes also depend on the way the evidence is collected and packaged?
Yes.
So, for example, if the collection was just not a good job, there could be DNA that was missed, and you wouldn't know that.
Potentially, if an item is collected and not stored properly or packaged properly, it could be exposed to those environmental factors that I discussed earlier, like heat, humidity, bacteria, microorganisms. All of those can degrade DNA on a sample, on a gun or knife or whatever sample we're talking about. And once that damage is done, once that DNA is degraded and in pieces, that's going to affect my ability to see results when I look at that DNA profile.
It's very difficult for you to be able to figure out how much damage was done. It's hard to know what you don't know, in other words.
Correct. The first I see of the evidence is when it's brought to me in the laboratory, the package. I don't know when that was collected, how it was stored, how long it was sitting in an office or wherever before it was submitted to our laboratory.
I think the next item that you talked about were swabs that were collected. I'm sorry, these little Exhibit 169 are the swabs from the flashlight that had no DNA results, correct? And also the swab from the bag of Skittles candy.
Correct.
And similarly, you received the swabs, someone else swabbed the item itself and gave this to you, and you did your analysis.
Yes, I never saw the bag, the Skittles bag or the flashlight.
Now we have Exhibit 191. Those are the little wooden sticks that you talked about that in your training and experience are used for fingernail scrapings.
Yes.
And what your understanding of the procedure is that the small stick is scraped under the edge of the fingernail to see if whatever's under the fingernail that might have some biological component is gathered on the stick and then submitted to you.
That's correct.
So I take it could be blood, but it could be other stuff too?
Well, if I see red-brown staining on the item, I do test it for the possible presence of blood, which I did with the right hand, the stick collected from the right hand, and that gave me a positive result.
Yes.
So,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You actually saw something on the stick that made you think it could be blood?
Yes.
And then you did the presumptive?
Yes.
And then you got a positive, so you did the DNA?
Yes.
And you indeed were able to confirm that that was Trayvon Martin's blood?
Yes, the profile matched him, which means nothing foreign. I did not find anything foreign to him on that stick.
And then on the left, I don't want to confuse them. Which one was negative?
The left hand, I did not test for blood. There was no staining on the stick collected from the left hand, and I was not able to obtain any DNA results from my testing on that stick.
So even though you didn't see what in your mind might be blood, you tested it anyway?
Yeah, well, I'm not necessarily looking for blood. A lot of times, when fingernails or fingernail scrapings are collected, there's going to be blood present. A lot of times, that person is bleeding, touching that area that they're bleeding from, and their own blood a lot of times is going to be present. I'm more interested in anything foreign to the person whose fingernails they are. So I'm more interested in any maybe skin from the other person or other people involved in the incident that might have scraped off underneath the fingernails of that individual. It could be blood from that other individual. If there was a fight and that other person was bleeding, there could be blood from both people underneath the fingernails. But I'm more interested in anything foreign to the blood from that person.
Insofar as the blood on the right hand from Trayvon Martin, you would have no idea when that blood may have come in contact with his fingernail.
That's correct.
Whether it was during whatever incident took place or after if he touched his own clothing that had blood.
That's correct.
Or transferred from during the process of delivery service, for example. In other words, you just don't know.
That's correct. I just know whatever was on that stick when I swabbed it, that's when those are the results. I don't know when whatever DNA got underneath those fingernails. I don't know when that happened.
And on the left hand, there was no DNA of anyone, not even Trayvon Martin.
That's correct.
Did that surprise you?
No,
Because there just wasn't? Is that what it boils down to?
I mean, it's a very small stick and you're scraping underneath fingernails. I can expect to see the DNA from that person whose fingers they are. However, it's not a guarantee that I'm going to get DNA from them. Most of the time, you see at least some kind of DNA profile from that individual, but it doesn't surprise me if I get no DNA results. It's a very small stick that I'm swabbing, a very small area that they're trying to collect DNA from.
That's something that you've seen before, where there just hasn't been any DNA on the fingernail scraping stick.
That's correct.
So in other words, the absence of evidence isn't particularly significant to you in that instance.
No,
Have you, I take it that you were not present when that procedure process was done.
I was not.
So you didn't see anyone do any scraping, and I take it you never saw Trayvon Martin's fingernails.
No,
You don't know if they were long or short or whether there was anything at all visible.
no, I have no idea.
There is something curious here, though, that I wanted to ask you about. There's only one each, one for left and one for right. Do you think in evidence collection that all 5 fingers on each hand would have been scraped with the same stick?
Yes, generally speaking, that one stick would be used to scrape all 5 fingernails from that hand.
So you would take the stick and you would pull it underneath one fingernail, and then you would take the same thing and pull it under the other, and then likewise for each hand?
I've never done that process. I've never worked in the capacity where I'd be collecting that type of evidence, but I would imagine that that's how they would be doing it. But again, I would just be guessing because I've never done that.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you sort of just, in your mind, common sense would tell you that one stick would be used for all 5,
Yes.
as opposed to maybe only one fingernail was scraped on each hand?
I mean, that's certainly a possibility. However, they represented that from being the left hand. So in my mind, they scraped all 5 fingernails from that left hand and from that right hand with those 2 sticks.
But you don't know that.
If this matters to you, on the packaging, it says fingernail left and fingernail right,
Mhm.
as opposed to fingernails. Does that mean anything to you?
No.
You didn't participate at all in the collection of this, as you said. But we can talk to the people that did.
Yes, that's how they chose to label and type it out and put that label on there.
Weird.
I noticed, though, just curiously, that each part of the gun was swabbed separately. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So there's a swab that relates to the slide, a separate one for the grip, a separate one for the trigger, and then a separate one for the holster.
Yes.
So that would tell you where, at least from what part, more precisely, any DNA was located.
Yes.
So for example, on that, that right hand, I guess, where Trayvon Martin's blood was, you would have no idea under which nail or where that was actually collected.
That's correct. Somewhere on the right hand, that blood was present, at least under one of those fingernails.
According to the packaging.
Yes.
Oof, all right, guys. I am on the struggle bus today.
All right, let's talk about the hooded sweatshirt for a moment. I believe that's Exhibit 155. That's represented in Exhibit 118 in the picture. Let's talk about the packaging of this particular item, or in fact, well, first, did you do any processing for DNA of any sort on Trayvon Martin's pants?
No.
Never saw those.
No.
So your DNA analysis was based upon 2 articles of clothing, the hooded sweatshirt, and then the underneath shirt?
As far as what Trayvon Martin was wearing?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm. So as far as those particular items, you talked a little bit about packaging that can, by virtue of how it's packaged, cause degradation of biological samples.
It could potentially, yes.
You're familiar with NIST? Do you know the acronym NIST?
National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Right. That's an organization that helps standardize such things as evidence collection techniques and such.
Yes, NIST is a government organization that issues standards. We actually have the standards for like calibration and stuff like that as a reference to make sure that your instrumentation works. We actually have NIST standards in our laboratory that we're required to run annually, and sometimes more than that, depending on if we get a new instrument or any new chemistry, to make sure that we're obtaining the right results from these standards.
And is NIST part of the accreditation process for the lab?
No.
Then you mentioned that the lab is accredited,
Yes,
but that's a different set of standards than the NIST standards that you were talking about?
that's correct. We
Explain that
are
just a bit.
accredited by ASCLD Lab. That stands for the American Society of Crime Lab Directors Laboratory Accreditation Board, and it's an organization made up of forensic laboratory directors from all over the country, and they come out and they do a thorough inspection of your facilities, your standard operating procedures, your case files. They interview your personnel, and they make sure that you meet the FBI's quality assurance standards in order to maintain or get accreditation. That inspection takes place every 5 years. We had one in 2010, just 3 years ago now. And in between those 5-year inspections, we're required to maintain accreditation. We're required to undergo an internal audit every year and an external audit every other year.
And in addition to that, for the lab, you also yourself have to undergo regular proficiency testing?
Yes, that's part of the accreditation process that every analyst or forensic technologist that wants to be proficient in DNA testing needs to undergo those proficiency tests that I discussed at the very beginning of my testimony. Tests from outside companies that I run to a set of samples that I run as if it were a case, and I send the results out, and then they send a notice back saying I passed or I didn't pass, and that I do every 6 months. Everyone in the lab is required to do that every 6 months.
Sounds like at least then 10 times each 5-year cycle that you yourself have to go through proficiency testing.
Yes.
When we're talking about standards and we're talking about biological evidence in particular, is biological evidence sort of a broad term for what may contain blood, fluids, DNA, and that sort of thing?
Yes, it is. I work in the biology section, so we don't call it the DNA section, we're the biology section. It encompassed not just DNA. At one point, back before DNA testing, there was other testing done on, it's called biological fluid.
And it's well known that handling and packaging wet evidence that may have biological evidence on it is how it should be done. I didn't say that at all.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, it's well known in
Objection. I don't
the
understand
process
what
of
you just
collecting and
said.
preserving biological evidence, how you should handle wet evidence.
Correct.
In fact, wet evidence that's believed to contain biological material is supposed to be air dried.
Yes, anything wet that might have blood or any kind of biological material on it should be dried down, because if it remains wet, that moisture, if you package it, that could get trapped in, and you could develop microorganisms, bacteria, mold, whatever, and all those things degrade the DNA that might be there.
In fact, it's recognized that there's a high probability that biological material will be destroyed by bacterial growth, which could potentially preclude the generation of DNA results if wet material isn't air dried.
That's correct.
So that brings us to the sweatshirts. Were you present at the time they were received by FDLE or soon thereafter?
The first time I saw the sweatshirt was when the package was brought to myself.
Had it been opened already?
Yes.
Who opened it?
Alvin Guzman, who is an analyst or forensic technologist in the trace evidence section, had already opened that package and done his examination, and then sealed that back in the package, and I got a transfer from him.
Trace evidence is another section of your lab.
Yes.
Just generally, that's where the evidence might be inspected for stuff, whatever little stuff might be clinging to it. It would be collected and packaged and then perhaps submitted to someone else to analyze.
Yes. Trace evidence looks at like small fibers and stuff like that.
And when you got the evidence of the two shirts, were they repackaged and sealed in the same packaging that they were submitted to the lab?
Yes.
And what was that?
The outer container was a, may I refer to my notes?
Of course. Mhm.
Both sweatshirts, the light gray one and the dark gray one, they were both packaged. The outer container was a brown paper bag. And then inside that sealed brown paper bag was a red, what I call a biohazard bag. It's a red plastic bag that's usually used for putting biohazardous material in. And that biohazard bag was not sealed with tape necessarily, but it was knotted, sealed with a knot. And then inside that red bag was the sweatshirt, both sweatshirts, individually in separate packages, not in the same package.
It's common for you to receive evidence in brown paper bags, correct?
Yes, brown paper bags is ideal for packaging items because the paper bag lets the item breathe. So if there's any moisture in there, it'll dry out.
Unfortunately, in this situation, while the exterior packaging was brown paper, the interior packaging was plastic.
Yes, it was a red biohazard plastic bag.
And even though you didn't see it when Mr. Guzman opened it, you're saying that he tied it back up before he gave it to you?
Yes,
And then when you opened it to begin your inspection, you detected quite an odor of mold or ammonia,
yes.
correct? It struck you that it smelled bad.
On one of the sweatshirts, the dark gray hooded sweatshirt. The light gray sweatshirt did not have the same odor.
And that meant to you that it maybe wasn't as wet?
Correct.
I take your assumption, your professional assumption was this smell is associated with evidence that has been packaged wet and then stored for a period of time.
Correct. The items, both sweatshirts were still wet when I opened the package. The light gray non-hooded sweatshirt was damp, a little damp. It wasn't really that wet. The dark gray hooded sweatshirt was more damp. It was wet, and it had a very pungent odor. Ammonia, mold. I'm not exactly sure what the odor was. Something along those lines. I noted in my notes.
Did you ever find your gym bag in the trunk after a couple of weeks? That kind of odor? You know what I'm talking about? Kind of strong ammonia, mold, this dirty laundry that's been sitting around a while?
I've had sports equipment that have smelled like that before, yes.
What should have been done, if I hear what you're saying, is that the clothing should have been air dried before it was packaged, or at least packaged in paper bags.
That's correct. Ideally, yes, you'd like to air dry anything you collect, especially items of clothing that are wet. You'd like to air dry them before you package them. And on top of that, we encourage our agencies not to put things into plastic bags because those don't allow the evidence to breathe, and that'll trap in any kind of moisture.
And that would be a red flag to you as an analyst that there's something going on with this evidence that places the biological evidence at a risk of degradation.
Correct.
The things that you were talking about before, how the strands break up and such.
Yes, that's correct.
And I take it would be impossible for you to be able to quantify precisely how much degradation there was.
And that's correct. I mean, you can tell by the testing you do, maybe you expect more results than you got, and you can say, oh, there's probably some degradation. However, I mean, that's a hypothetical situation. If the evidence were allowed to dry down and package properly, would I have gotten more results? Potentially, but I don't know for sure, and that's a hypothetical.
That's an unknown factor in this case.
Correct.
You don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
So did you dry the evidence at that point?
I left it out to dry as long as I could. However, I needed to transfer that item to the firearms examiner, Amy Seward. So I can't, when we transfer from one section to another section, I just can't take the sweatshirt and hand it to her. So here you go. That needs to be put back into the original packaging for the transfer. So I did package that back up, and it was still wet when I packaged it back up. But that transfer from Alvin Guzman to myself to Amy Seward took place in a matter of hours, not days or weeks.
Had you taken your cuttings and finished your photography and done your swabbing before you passed it on to Ms. Seward?
Correct. I took everything I needed. I did all of my analysis because I knew that was going to be transferred on. And once another section gets a hold of that and they're testing it for latent fingerprints or firearms exams or whatever they're doing to it, that could potentially affect my ability to get results. There's always an order at which the evidence goes from section to section.
So the way the sequence went in the lab, Mr. Guzman started with the trace,
Correct.
and he wouldn't apply chemicals for that sort of thing.
No.
It's more of a visual inspection and then collection of fibers and such.
It's called sweeping, what he does. And I've never done it. I'm not trained in how to do it, but I have observed him doing it. And he's basically brushing the item to collect any kind of trace evidence, any kind of fibers or.
Process for DNA.
Yes.
Can you describe briefly what that is? What do you do at the point that you've got these cuttings?
Yes.
Let's do that then. If we could. And whose are B and C? if you
He
know?
tested negative for the possible presence of blood.
Again, you don't know how it came to be there, but you know it was there when you saw it.
No, I don't know when and how.
And whose blood is that?
That I obtained a complete DNA profile, which matched George potential. Yes.
Because, for example, you might have been able to identify one or the other as from that particular cutting
Correct.
or from any of the others.
Correct.
But by doing them all at once, you got a full view of.
Potential saliva.
So let's talk about the left and the right. Just start with the left. What were your findings
Left
there?
sleeve or cuff. I did get foreign DNA. Yes.
Without going through all of the samples that were George Zimmerman, were there any spots on that outside shirt that were or could have been Trayvon Martin's blood.
On the orange jacket? Yes.
And let's do this one more time. You can point that out.
Matched Trayvon Martin.
When you say major and minor, you're talking about more from one, more blood from one than the other?
Well, more DNA from one than the other. Major would be the more DNA, minor would be the lesser DNA.
Can you still see some of the staining from N that you talked about on the jacket?
Yes.
The cutting that you took in the same fashion you'd done before was a visible stain that was positive for blood with the filter paper rubbing
Yes.
and is representative basically of what you thought you'd need to get a reliable DNA result.
Yes.
You didn't test any of the other specific spots,
The whole stain was rubbed with the filter paper for the blood test.
right?
But as far as the DNA testing,
Mhm.
these were the two cuttings that I took and put in the tube. There's one clearly visible, and there's actually one on the interface, so to speak, between the two colors.
So sort of like stain D, I
Yes.
think. Looking back, you may have chosen to make separate cuttings within the larger stain, but in this case, the DNA results were a combination of both of the cuttings.
Correct. It's possible that the one cutting was one, could have been an individual profile in this one, but it's possible they both would have been mixtures, regardless. Exclude either of the two individuals.
V could, from the limited information we had, could have been Trayvon Martin. You couldn't say it wasn't, but you can't say it was.
Correct.
V is represented by this larger circle with the three separate cuttings.
Yes. That's it for this one.
Okay. Maybe just flip the exhibit. Hearing completion here.
The witness, Your Honor? Okay, let's assume I'm wearing a red jacket, correct?
Okay.
And so you're saying on the right side, right here, some of Trayvon Martin's possible DNA is there, right?
Potentially, yes.
Potentially. I'm just saying he's included as a possible, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're Trayvon Martin, may I approach the witness, Your Honor? And I promise I won't hit you.
I'm sorry, there's an objection.
So hypothetical with the witness beyond the scope of cross that is asking this witness to speculate about an area for which he said he has no expertise. He's a DNA analyst, not a,
Okay, that's a speaking objection.
yes, ma'am.
So if you want to approach, you may do so.
Oh, she's gonna let him approach.
So that actually have, if it was Trayvon Martin, all right?
I
Remember him
don't know
telling you
what I
that?
don't know. Yes, correct.
Okay, in other words, I could have, there could be a rat right under this table, but you don't know, right? That would be pure speculation,
Correct.
right? Unless you came down here and looked and saw a dead rat or bits you. Did I get that right, or if I got,
No.
I'm sorry, stained U was the right cuff. If I got that right?
Stain U was the one we were just talking
Right,
about.
but it's the right cuff, meaning right here, right cuff.
Yes.
Right, overruled.
You understand my question, sir?
Yes.
Okay. You did not find on Trayvon Martin's hooded, you didn't find, you tested from here to here, and you didn't find any of the defendant's DNA on there, correct?
There was nothing.
Now it's the next answer, it's the same.
No more questions.
And on the other parts, A, B, and C, you didn't find the defendant's, or George Zimmerman's DNA, right? On the other parts of the hoodie.
I didn't test B, but A and C, there was nothing that matched him. No.
And B was negative, that's the delay.
Correct.
Came in contact with Mr. Zimmerman's cuff. You just wouldn't and don't want to speculate how it came to be there.
All I know about that sample is it tested positive for the possible presence of blood, and I obtained a mixture in which Trayvon Martin was included in.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
May Mr. Gordon be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. You are excused. Yes.
We're not gonna see that they rest.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and recess for your purposes for this evening. I would like to start Friday morning at 8:30. When you're the overnight and Thursday recess, you're not to read or listen to any radio, television, or newspaper reports about the case. You're not to discuss the case amongst yourselves nor with anybody else.
Oh my God. They were supposed to rest. That's what she said. That's what they said. They were supposed to rest today. Do they do it tomorrow? Who's this one?
Okay, we're on the record, case number 12, CF 1083A, State versus George Zimmerman. Are you still working on the evidence locker?
You're on the student.
And I guess that means that we're not working tomorrow morning. We
That
have
is
to have it
correct.
scheduled.
And it's a stipulation that the body examined on February 27th, 2012 by Dr.
Of weather conditions on the evening of February 26, 2012, and there's a report attached to the request.
No hands are being raised. Did any of you use any type of? Yes, ma'am. Please be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. I hope you had a nice 4th of July. While you're getting settled in, I'm going to ask my questions. If your answer is yes to any of my questions, please raise your hand. During the recess, do any radio, television, or newspaper reports about the case? No hands are being raised. Did any of you use any type of an electronic device to get on the internet to do independent research about the case, people, places, things, or terminology? No hands are being raised. And finally, did any of you read or create any emails, text messages, Twitters, tweets, blogs, or social networking pages about the case? Okay, thank you very much. The state may call your next witness.
Stay with Constable Sabrina Fulton.
They were supposed to be finished. Now they're gonna call the mama. Whatever. This is for another day. I'm tired. I cannot. Okay. Well, that's the end of day 8. I don't even know. He did some DNA. Some blood was George's, some blood was Trayvon's. It doesn't really matter. He was shot. He's gonna get blood on him. I don't know. I think they're just grasping for straws at this point. I don't really understand. I mean, I guess I know they have to do with the experts and things, and they have to do those things, but it's so boring. It's so boring to sit here and listen to these people talk about all of their skills and classes that they have to take and all of this mumbo jumbo. Whatever. Anyway. Okay. Good evening, good afternoon, good night. It is good night for me. It is good night for Kitty Cat. He's asleep. I am going to go crawl in my bed and go to sleep. Okay. Later.